Every spring, before flood season, engineers on the Yangtze River do something that looks like failure. They draw the reservoir down, months ahead of the rains, preserving more than 22 billion cubic meters of space for a flood that hasn't arrived yet. Not a mistake, a deliberate decision. Near Chengdu, a river was split 2,000 years ago without ever building a dam. In Wuhan, entire parks are designed to flood on purpose. In one southern city, 1,000-year-old drains still close themselves when the river rises. A lake near Shanghai can send floodwater 3 different ways. A digital copy of the Yangtze now runs the flood before it happens. On the Huai River, one gate can send water into farmland where nearly 200,000 people live. A flood to not be avoided. So who decides where it goes?
This film follows 7 systems, each escalating past the last. A reservoir that stores time. A river taught to divide itself. A city built to absorb the first hit. A drainage system old enough to have outlived its engineers. A lake with more than one way out. A digital river that tests the future first. And one gate that sends real water into a place where people live. Each one shows where the water begins, where it's sent, and who pays when capacity runs out.
This is not a list of China's dams. It is an investigation into 7 decisions about where water is allowed to go. Held, split, absorbed, drained, routed, forecast, or diverted onto one place to spare another. It starts on the Yangtze, at the reservoir built to run low before the rains.
Chapter 1, Three Gorges, the empty space reserved for a flood. This is the world's largest hydropower plant by installed capacity, and for part of the year, it is deliberately not full. Every year, before the flood season builds across the Yangtze Basin, operators lower the Three Gorges Reservoir to its designated flood control level. Bare banks appear along the shoreline as the water falls from its high water mark near 175 meters down toward a lower flood season floor near 145 meters.
To a visitor, it can look like the dam is failing to do its job. It is the opposite. The reservoir's flood control capacity is approximately 22 billion cubic meters. That volume is not stored water. It is deliberately preserved absence. Empty space reserved months in advance for a flood that has not happened yet. Here is the problem it solves. Rain across the upper Yangtze Basin does not arrive evenly. It arrives in pulses, sometimes violent ones, as tributaries swell within days and send a peak downstream toward Hubei, Hunan, and the crowded cities along the middle and lower river. Without somewhere to absorb that peak, the surge would move downstream largely intact.
Instead, when the flood arrives, the reservoir intercepts it. Inflow is held back. Outflow is released at a slower, calculated rate, so the peak is spread across days instead of hours. The dam does not stop the flood. It changes its shape in time. A wall of water becomes a longer, gentler pulse, giving downstream levees and drainage systems more time to cope with it. That difference, sharp peak versus stretched release, is the entire function. And Three Gorges rarely works alone. Upstream on the Dujiangyan River, a chain of other major reservoirs is lowered on a similar schedule, so that the basin's total flood control space is coordinated, not just concentrated in one place. Here is the misconception worth correcting. Three Gorges is not a single wall holding back the entire Yangtze.
No fixed rule governs every flood the same way, and the reservoir's capacity, large as it is still a fraction of what the river can carry in its worst years. That capacity also came at a cost that does not appear on a hydrological chart. Building the reservoir meant relocating more than 1 million people and submerging valleys, towns, and farmland that will not return. Flood control here shares space with hydropower, river navigation, sediment management, and an ecosystem still adjusting to a changed river. The empty space upstream protects the space downstream, but it does not do it for free. Three Gorges buys time by storing a peak. Upstream, in the mountains above Chengdu, a much older system solved the same problem without ever building a wall at all.
Chapter 2. Dujiangyan. The river split without a dam. Where the Min River leaves the mountains and reaches the Chengdu Plain, the historic system does not seal it behind a high dam. More than 2,000 years ago, in the 3rd century BCE, a regional governor named Li Bing faced a river that flooded the plain almost every year and left it dry the rest of the time. His answer was not to block the river. It was to divide it. At a place called Yuzui, the fish mouth, a long levee splits the current into 2 channels the moment it reaches the plain. One channel carries water away as a flood relief route. The other carries it toward the fields and the city. The split is not fixed by a gate. It is shaped by the river itself, by the geometry of the levee and the curve of the current, so that during higher flows, the outer channel tends to take a greater share.
Further down, at Fushougou, a low spillway does something even more specific. When water in the inner channel rises above what the system downstream can safely carry, the excess spills sideways back into the outer river, taking heavy sediment with it. The last stage is a narrow gorge cut through solid rock called Baopingkou, the bottleneck channel. It took Li Bing's workers years to cut it by hand. Its width does not change. That fixed, narrow opening is what limits how much water the inner channel can physically accept, no matter how much arrives above it. Today, that same split still irrigates nearly 700,000 hectares of farmland across the Chengdu Plain. But no fixed geometry can manage every possible flood. During exceptional flows, the historic system works as part of a much larger modern network of reservoirs, channels, monitoring systems, and flood defenses across the Min River basin.
3 stages. No pump, no floodgate needing a human hand at the critical moment. Gravity, curvature, and a fixed opening, arranged so the plain receives roughly the water it can use, and the river carries the rest away on its own. Here is what the postcard version leaves out. Dujiangyan does not eliminate flooding on the Min River, and it has not stayed frozen since the 3rd century BCE. The system has been repaired, rebuilt, and reinforced across dynasties, and modern maintenance still clears silt from the channels every year to keep the original proportions working.
The genuine achievement is narrower than the legend, and more interesting. Ancient engineers did not calculate flow rates the way modern hydrologists do. What they built was a shape, one that uses the physics of moving water to divide it automatically, without requiring a gate to be opened at the moment the river divides, which is very different from the actively operated reservoirs, pumps, and gates that dominate much of modern flood control. That question, how much can a shape do without a decision, becomes even sharper in a completely different kind of system. Because further east, in a city of nearly 14 million people, engineers are trying to answer it again, this time before a single drop even reaches a river at all.
Chapter 3. Wuhan Sponge City. the parks designed to take the first hit. Wuhan sits among more than 100 lakes at the low-lying confluence of the Yangtze and Han rivers under a humid subtropical monsoon climate built for water. For decades, the city grew the way most cities grow. Concrete, asphalt, rooftops, impermeable surfaces replacing the wetlands and floodplains that used to absorb the rain.
Every drop that used to soak into ground now had one path, into a pipe, then into a drain, then into a system built for an earlier, smaller city. When storms intensified, that system reached its limit fast. So Wuhan became one of China's national pilot cities for a different approach. Instead of routing every drop into pipes immediately, sections of the city are built to hold water on purpose for a while before releasing it.
Streets paved with permeable material let rain sink straight through instead of running off at all. Rooftops planted with vegetation absorb part of every storm before it reaches the ground at all. Parks are shaped into shallow basins, engineered to flood safely and drain slowly, holding storm water the way a sponge holds liquid instead of letting it run straight off a hard surface.
Restored wetlands filter and slow water at the edges of lakes that were nearly paved over a generation ago. The demonstration phase alone covered 2 designated pilot zones and nearly 300 individual projects. Roads rebuilt with absorbent surfaces, residential blocks regraded around new rain gardens, public squares re-engineered to double as temporary basins during the worst of a storm. Every park reshaped to hold water is space that could otherwise have been built on, and every retrofit competes for funding against more conventional drainage upgrades. None of this replaces Wuhan's pipes, pumps, and drainage channels. It works alongside them, absorbing part of the load before conventional infrastructure has to carry the rest. The national program set an ambitious target: a large share of a typical year's rainfall retained and reused on site across the pilot area, rather than shed immediately as runoff.
That number is a planning goal, not a guarantee delivered in every storm. Wuhan still floods. Intense, short-duration rainfall can still overwhelm any single measure, sponge infrastructure included, and large sections of the city have not yet been converted at all. What the sponge approach actually changes is timing. Thousands of individual roofs, streets, and lawns each hold back a small amount of water for a while. Multiplied across a city, those small delays add up to something significant. Less water arriving at the drains during the worst 10 minutes of a storm, and more time for the rest of the system to keep up. The goal was never to make the rain disappear. It was to stop millions of individual drops from arriving at the same pipe at the same moment and turning into one destructive wave of urban runoff.
There are quieter, older versions of the same idea elsewhere in China. Versions that never needed a national program because they were built into the ground centuries before pumps existed at all. Wuhan stores water on the surface, drop by drop, across an entire modern city. To the south, an older city built its answer underground and gave it a name that translates roughly as fortune and longevity.
Chapter 4: Fushougou, the 1,000-year-old drains that close themselves. Ganzhou sits at the point where the Zhang and Gong rivers meet to form the Gan. 3 rivers meeting at one old city, built on low ground that has always had to answer to water. Almost 1,000 years ago, during the Song Dynasty, city planners solved the problem with a drainage network that tradition credits to a local official named Liu Yi.
historical records are not fully certain about exactly who built what and how much of the network he personally designed.
What survives is clearer than the biography. Beneath the old city, brick-lined channels once ran for approximately 12.5 kilometers, laid out to follow the natural slope of the land, from the higher ground in the southwest down toward the rivers in the northeast. No pumps. Gravity did the work, the same way it does at Dujiangyan, far to the west. Along the way, the channels connected to a network of ponds scattered through the city, giving the whole system somewhere to store a surge of rainwater instead of forcing it straight through the pipes at once. At its historical peak, nearly 100 of these ponds were connected into the network, so a heavy rain didn't have to move through the city all at once. It could sit across dozens of small basins until the rivers outside had room for it. Even so, the system had limits. In the heaviest storms, water rising faster than the ponds and channels could hold it still pooled in the streets. The most specific piece of engineering sits at the outlets, where the channels finally reach the riverbank. Historic accounts describe 12 of these openings, known as water windows. During ordinary weather, they hang open, letting the city's drained water flow out into the river without resistance. But when the river itself rises in flood, the pressure of that outside water pushes against the same openings from the other direction and closes them. No one has to run outside and shut a gate in a storm. The river's own force does it, using the same physics as a one-way valve, centuries before that word existed in Chinese engineering vocabulary. Here is what has to be corrected. The claim that this system alone kept Guangzhou entirely flood-free for 1,000 years is a simplification. Detailed performance records from most of that history do not survive, and the city has faced serious flooding at points across its history like anywhere else on a river. And the network itself has shrunk. Rapid urban growth in the 20th century paved over or replaced most of the original 12.5 kilometers. Today, only a small fragment remains intact, along with a handful of the original 12 water windows. What survived is enough to demonstrate the principle, even if it can no longer carry the whole modern city. An outlet that opens and closes itself, powered by nothing but the water pressure on either side of it. That is not a folktale. It is hydraulics, built into brick and stone before anyone had a word for it. The ditches that still function today continue to serve the neighborhoods built around them, moving rainwater by gravity exactly as they did 900 years ago. Fushougou solves the problem for one city, using drains that think for themselves. Hundreds of kilometers east, an entire regional lake has to solve the same problem at a scale where one city's decision affects 3 provinces. Chapter 5. Taihu Basin, the lake that can drain in 3 directions. Taihu Lake sits at the center of one of the most crowded deltas on Earth, bordered by 3 provincial-level regions and tens of millions of cubic meters to the basin. Multiply that by a much larger rise during a severe monsoon season, and the numbers escalate quickly, which is exactly why the basin needs several routes to lower the lake before rising water threatens the shoreline defenses. A comprehensive plan for controlling floods across the basin had already been under consideration for years, but coordination between competing jurisdictions moved slowly, and construction lagged well behind the paperwork. In 1991, monsoon rains pushed the lake to its highest recorded level in decades, and the flooding that followed exposed exactly how far the existing defenses fell short. The disaster didn't begin the planning. It forced the planning into motion. What followed was the accelerated construction of 11 major flood control projects, designed not around a single wall, but around a coordinated system of storage and multiple exits. Dikes around the lake's perimeter were raised, giving Taihu itself more room to absorb an incoming surge before any water has to move at all. But storage alone was never going to be enough for a lake this size. So engineers gave the basin 3 separate directions to send the water once storage fills. Northward, channels carry floodwater from Taihu toward the Yangtze River. Eastward, the Taihu River and connected waterways drain toward the Huangpu River, which passes through Shanghai on its way to the sea. Southward, a separate network of channels discharges toward Hangzhou Bay. 3 exits, not 1, which sounds simple until you consider what actually decides which door opens and how far. The Huangpu route is tidal. It can only drain freely for part of each day, when the tide isn't pushing back upstream. The southern route, toward Hangzhou Bay, serves double duty, also carrying storm runoff from the farmland south of the lake, so it can't be treated as an empty pipe reserved only for Taihu's overflow. And every gate in the system sits inside a jurisdiction, Jiangsu, Zhejiang, or Shanghai, that has its own water supply and water quality needs to protect. At the same time, it's being asked to accept someone else's floodwater. Here is the correction worth making. Taihu cannot simply empty itself in whichever direction is most convenient, and not every route can run at full capacity at the same time. Discharging into any of these rivers also carries sediment, nutrients, and pollutants downstream, so every release is a trade against water quality, not a cost-free relief valve. What actually happens during a major flood is closer to negotiation than mechanics. Which gate, how much, for how long, coordinated across 3 separate administrations that don't automatically agree.
The basin doesn't search for one perfect outlet. It chooses among several imperfect ones, based on tides, rainfall, and what the rivers downstream can currently absorb. Taihu gives operators several physical roads the water can travel. But before any gate actually moves, a very different kind of system now runs the flood first, as data on a screen, before it happens in the real river at all.
Chapter 6. Digital Yangtze. The flood simulated before it arrives. Somewhere in a building far from any riverbank, there is a version of the Yangtze that doesn't exist in physical space. Engineers at the Chengdu Water Resources Commission call it a digital twin, a continuously updated model of the river, the Three Gorges Dam, and the reservoirs connected to it, built from real-time data pulled from hydrological stations along hundreds of kilometers of waterway. The wider system grew from several separate pilot projects: Three Gorges, Dujiangyan, the Han River Basin, and the Jiangyan system on the Huai River.
Each modeled a different combination of terrain, reservoirs, and operating decisions before their results were progressively integrated into the wider digital Yangtze. Rainfall gauges, water level sensors, structural monitors on the dam itself. All of it flows into the model continuously, so the digital river updates almost as fast as the real one changes. Each new flood season adds another layer of real data, giving engineers more evidence with which to test, recalibrate, and improve the models.
The system can replay past floods, testing how a historical event would unfold under today's infrastructure. More importantly, it can run forward, taking the rainfall and inflow data available right now and projecting how a flood developing upstream is likely to behave days before it reaches the middle and lower river. It generates 3-dimensional inundation maps, showing not just how high the water might rise, but where it would actually spread if a specific dike failed at a specific point. Behind that map sits a database covering 706 polders, the diked farmland and settlements that line both banks of the Yangtze, cross-referenced against the condition of the dikes protecting each one.
On July 2nd, 2024, the system warned that approximately 2,430 kilometers of dikes across 5 provinces could exceed warning levels, giving local authorities time to prepare. That lead time is the entire value. It lets planners compare outcomes before committing to one. What happens if this reservoir holds back more water? What an authorized diversion into a designated flood storage area would relieve and what it would cast? What happens if this village is evacuated now instead of in 6 hours? Here is what the digital twin is not. It is not a machine making decisions on its own.
Every simulation still ends with a human choice made by engineers and officials who weigh the model's projections against information the model doesn't have. Political consequences, local knowledge, the condition of a specific embankment that hasn't been inspected recently. The forecasts are not certainties. A model built from hundreds of variables can still miss a local failure that inspectors on the ground would catch, and no simulation guarantees that an evacuation ordered from its projections will happen safely or on time.
The digital river isn't valuable because it knows exactly what will happen. It's valuable because it lets the people responsible for the real river see several different futures side by side before they have to choose which one to prevent. Simulation can show where the water is likely to go and how bad each option looks on a screen. But somewhere on the Huai River north of here, a single physical gate still has to make that choice real, and it doesn't get to choose a future without a cost.
Chapter 7. Wangjiaba, the gate that decides which land takes the water. On the Huai River in Anhui Province, there is a gate that people watch the way others watch a storm forecast. It's called Wangjiaba. 13 sluice openings, first built in 1953, torn down and rebuilt to a stronger, modernized design completed in 2004, sitting at the point where the upper Huai River meets the middle reaches. Engineers here track one number above all others, the guaranteed water level. When the Huai rises past it and keeps climbing, officials face a decision where engineering and human consequence become the same problem.
On the other side of the gate lies the Menghua flood storage area, roughly 180 square kilometers of farmland and villages, home to nearly 200,000 people, built and zoned specifically to absorb floodwater when the alternative is worse. This is not an empty floodplain. People live here, farm here, raise children here in the years between the floods. When the decision is made, the gates open, and the river is deliberately allowed to spread across that land. Fields disappear underwater within hours. Low-lying homes outside the designated shelter areas can be seriously damaged. This is not a levee failing. It is the opposite, a controlled operation authorized through China's flood control command system, executed on purpose to reduce pressure on other reaches of the Huai River where the same flood peak could threaten settlements, farmland, transport links, and industry. Ahead of the opening, residents evacuate to raised shelter platforms built into the storage area itself, or move out entirely. Compensation is required for specified losses to crops, homes, livestock, and equipment. But indirect costs, interrupted work, delayed planting, damaged local businesses, and the time required to recover can extend beyond what a single payment captures. The gate has been opened many times since 1953, spread across multiple flood seasons, some years more than once. Each opening protects a different set of downstream places: cities, rail lines, farmland, industry, while asking this specific stretch of land to absorb the water first. Not because the people here matter less, because this stretch of the Huai River was engineered over decades specifically to take it. Flood control is sometimes described as a fight between people and a river, humans against nature, engineering against chaos. Standing at Wangjiaba, that framing doesn't hold. The river doesn't choose where it goes. A gate does, informed by data, by forecasts, by decades of hydrology, but ultimately operated by people, deciding which populated place absorbs a cost that has to land somewhere. The flood was never going to disappear. Every system in this film, the reservoir, the split river, the absorbing city, the self-closing drains, the three-way lake, the digital forecast, exists to answer the same question this gate answers in its most direct form. Not whether the water can be stopped, who has to hold it, and for how long.
7 systems, 7 different answers to the same question. Three Gorges preserves empty space months before it's needed. Dujiangyan splits a river using nothing but its own shape. Wuhan absorbs rain across 1,000 small surfaces before it becomes a flood. Fushougou trains a city through openings that close themselves. Taihu chooses among 3 imperfect exits instead of searching for one perfect one. The digital Yangtze tests futures on a screen before any gate moves in reality. And Wangjiaba sends real water into a real populated place, because somewhere always has to take it first.
None of these systems make water disappear. They move it through time, through space, through one place instead of another, so that a city, a railway, a factory, or a field stays dry today. That protection is never free. The danger is delayed, redirected, measured, and eventually accepted somewhere else. It depends on another reservoir, another channel, another lake, or another floodplain being ready to take the pressure instead. The hardest question is not whether China can stop a flood. It is who decides where the flood is allowed to go.